If you're enjoying these stories, you can support us on Patreon. There are several unique stories over there that I haven't uploaded to YouTube. Please consider supporting me on Patreon if you can. Now, let's get into the story. The Adventure of the Venomous Lizard. In glancing over my notes of the several score of singular mysteries to which I have been a privileged participant and chronicler during my long association with Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I find none so strikingly grotesque in its initial presentation as the matter we came to know as the case of the venomous lizard. I have previously had occasion to allude to this bizarre affair, most notably when recording the facts of the Sussex vampire, wherein I mentioned the peculiar business of the Gila monster as an example of those cases which at first appeared to possess a supernatural or monstrous element, only to be resolved through the application of cold, unyielding logic. For years, the delicate nature of the individuals involved, and the scandalous ripples it threatened to send through the august halls of London's most esteemed scientific societies, prevented me from laying the facts before the public. Now, however, the principal actors have long since passed beyond the reach of worldly censure, and the true account of that grim April morning may finally be entered into the annals of my friend's extraordinary career. It was late April in the year 189, a season characterized by a persistent driving rain that lashed against the windows of our sitting room at 221B Baker Street. The weather had confined Holmes indoors for the better part of a week, a circumstance that invariably led to a state of highly charged, nervous energy. When he was not scraping discordantly upon his violin at ungodly hours, he was engaged in malodorous chemical experiments that left the air thick with the acrid scent of hydrochloric acid and burnt copper. I was sitting by the fire, nursing a slight ache in my old Jezail bullet wound, a reliable barometer of the dismal English spring, and attempting to read a recent treatise on tropical diseases, when the sharp, authoritative rap of the telegraph boy at our street door broke the domestic silence. Holmes, who had been peering intently into a bubbling retort, set down his glass rod and turned his hawk-like profile toward the door. "Ah, Watson," he murmured, his eyes gleaming with sudden interest. "Unless I am very much mistaken, that is the herald of our deliverance. A telegram. The heavy, hurried tread upon the stairs suggests urgency, and the time of day indicates that the sender has encountered a puzzle that has thoroughly disrupted his morning routine." Mrs. Hudson appeared a moment later, bearing the yellow envelope upon a silver salver. Holmes tore it open, his eyes darting over the contents. A grim smile played upon his thin lips as he tossed the paper across the table to me. "Read it aloud, Watson," he commanded, throwing himself into his armchair and steepling his long, sinewy fingers together. "Let us see what you make of it." I picked up the telegram and read. "A Gila monster, Holmes?" I exclaimed, staring at the paper. "Surely there must be some mistake. We are in the home counties of England, not the arid deserts of the American Southwest." "No mistake, my dear doctor," Holmes replied, his eyes sparkling with the thrill of the chase. "Professor Julian Arbuthnot is, or rather was, one of the foremost herpetologists of our age. A man of independent wealth, he devoted his life and his considerable fortune to the study of the world's most obscure and deadly reptiles and amphibians. He maintained a private menagerie at his estate in Surrey that rivaled the zoological gardens. If a Gila monster, known to science as were to be found anywhere in the home counties, it would be within the heated confines of Arbuthnot's glass houses. But a lizard, Holmes? To commit a murder? Ah, there you touch upon the very crux of the matter, Holmes said, springing to his feet and casting off his mouse-coloured dressing gown. The Gila is indeed venomous, Watson. Its lower jaw possesses grooved teeth through which it introduces a neurotoxic venom into its prey, chewing it into the wound with a tenacity that is legendary among naturalists. Yet a fatal envenomation of a healthy adult human is an exceedingly rare occurrence. They are sluggish beasts, not prone to launching unprovoked attacks unless severely mishandled. For an experienced herpetologist to fall victim to one in his own greenhouse suggests a degree of clumsiness, entirely out of keeping with a man of Arbuthnot's reputation. Furthermore, Hopkins specifies a locked greenhouse. A locked room mystery, Watson, featuring a venomous desert lizard. It is a problem that appeals to my every instinct. Come, man, fetch your coat and your medical bag. There is a train from Waterloo that will put us in Surrey before the hour is out. The journey south was undertaken in a profound silence. Holmes sat with his eyes closed and his chin sunk upon his chest, lost in that state of intense, meditative concentration which those who did not know him well might mistake for sleep. I, meanwhile, gazed out the window at the rain-swept countryside, my mind turning over the bizarre elements of the telegram. I had seen death in many forms during my service in Afghanistan and in my subsequent years alongside Holmes. But the image of an eminent man of science struck down in a locked room by a sluggish, venomous lizard was grotesque in the extreme. As the train rattled over the tracks, Holmes suddenly opened his eyes and leaned forward. "You are pondering the lizard, Watson." "I confess I am," I replied. "I cannot fathom how such a creature could be the instrument of murder, assuming Hopkins is correct in his suspicion of foul play. Let us review the facts of the beast, for it is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data." Holmes began, adopting his familiar pedagogical tone. "The Gila monster is cold-blooded, Watson. It requires external heat to regulate its body temperature. In the wild, it basks upon sun-baked rocks. In the chilly climes of an English April, it would seek the warmest environment available to it. Secondly, consider its venom. It is agonizing, certainly, but lacks the rapid, paralyzing lethality of the Indian cobra or the African mamba. A bite would induce immense pain, swelling, perhaps a severe drop in blood pressure, but it affords ample time for the victim to seek aid, or at least to unlock a door and cry out. Yet Hopkins tells us the professor was found dead within a locked room. This suggests either a death of unimaginable suddenness or a scenario in which the room was secured after the fatal mechanism had been set in motion. Could the lizard have been introduced through a window or a chimney? I ventured. Unlikely in a specialized greenhouse, Holmes countered. Such structures, designed for tropical specimens, are sealed environments, built to maintain strict temperature and humidity. Vents are heavily meshed to prevent the escape of valuable specimens or the ingress of local vermin. No, Watson, the room was locked from the inside, or the lock was manipulated by a remarkably clever agency. But we shall see for ourselves presently. A damp, rattling cab conveyed us from the quiet Surrey station to the Ferns, a sprawling Victorian Gothic mansion surrounded by unkempt grounds that bespoke a master more concerned with his scientific pursuits than the manicuring of his lawns. To the rear of the main house, gleaming dully in the grey April light, stood a massive conservatory of iron and glass, an architectural marvel that looked like a slice of the Crystal Palace transplanted into the muddy countryside. Inspector Stanley Hopkins, a young, eager officer for whose methods Holmes held a degree of qualified respect, was waiting for us beneath the portico of the main house. He looked pale and deeply troubled. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I cannot express my gratitude for your prompt arrival," Hopkins said, shaking our hands vigorously. "I have ordered my men to touch absolutely nothing. The local surgeon has had a cursory glance, but at my strict instruction the body remains exactly as it was discovered." "You have acted with admirable discretion, Hopkins," Holmes approved. "Pray give us the sequence of events." "It was discovered this morning at 8 o'clock, Hopkins began, consulting his notebook as he led us through the house toward the rear gardens. Professor Arbuthnot was a man of rigid habit. He habitually retired to his main greenhouse every evening after dinner around 9 o'clock to conduct observations on his nocturnal specimens. It was his strict rule that he was never to be disturbed during these hours. He possessed the only key to the reinforced oak door that connects the conservatory to the main house. "There is no exterior door?" Holmes interrupted. "There is, but it has been bolted from the inside and rusted shut for years." The professor preferred strict control over the environment. This morning, when the professor failed to appear for breakfast, his housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, became alarmed. She summoned the professor's assistant, a Mr. Simon Penhaligon, who resides in the east wing of the house. Together they knocked upon the interior conservatory door. Receiving no answer, and finding it locked, Penhaligon summoned the local constable. They forced the door with a crowbar. I arrived on the scene an hour later. "And the key?" "It was in the lock on the inside," Hopkins said grimly. "Turn to the locked position." "Excellent," Holmes murmured, rubbing his hands together. "A classic of the genre. And what of the gruesome tableau within?" "It is exactly as I telegraphed," Hopkins replied, a shudder passing through his frame. "The heat inside is stifling, Mr. Holmes. Tropical. And sitting there in his armchair was the professor, dead as a stone, and perched atop his chest, right over his heart, was the Gila monster, a hideous beast, orange and black, thick as a man's forearm. It hissed at us when we approached. "Has it been secured?" I asked, feeling a reflexive twinge of alarm. "Yes, Dr. Watson. Mr. Penhaligon, despite his obvious shock, managed to coax the beast into a canvas sack with a pair of long iron tongs, and it is now locked within a heavy terrarium. But I assure you the creature was sitting directly upon the dead man's breast." We stepped out of the back of the house and approached the massive oak door of the conservatory. The wood surrounding the lock was splintered and broken, bearing mute testimony to the morning's frantic entry. "Let us examine the theatre of this tragedy," Holmes said, stepping over the threshold. The moment we entered, a wave of oppressive humid heat struck us like a physical blow. The air was heavy with the scent of damp loam, decaying vegetation, and the sharp, musky odours of exotic animals. The glass walls were obscured by condensation, giving the vast room a claustrophobic, jungle-like atmosphere. Great ferns, creeping vines, and broad-leaf tropical plants created a labyrinth of greenery, interspersed with heavy wooden tables bearing dozens of glass terrariums and meshed cages. In the centre of the room, positioned beneath a hanging gas lamp that had been extinguished, sat a heavy, high-backed leather armchair. In it was the body of Professor Julian Arbuthnot. He was a man in his late 50s, robust of frame, with a thick shock of greying hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He was clad in a light linen suit, suitable for the tropical heat of his workspace. His head was thrown back against the chair, his jaw slack, and his eyes wide open, staring sightlessly toward the glass ceiling. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair with such ferocious intensity that his knuckles were white, suggesting a final moment of supreme agony or paralysis. Holmes moved forward with the silent, predatory grace of a panther. He did not immediately approach the body, but instead began to circle the perimeter of the room, his sharp eyes darting over the terrariums, the floor grates, the heating pipes, and the locked exterior door. "The heating mechanism is formidable," Holmes noted, gesturing to a series of cast-iron pipes. "Powered by a boiler in the cellar, no doubt. The temperature here must be nearing 90 degrees Fahrenheit. 88, to be precise, Mr. Holmes," came a nervous, reedy voice from the doorway. We turned to see a young man standing just inside the splintered door. He was thin, pale, and possessed a shock of unruly dark hair. His eyes were red-rimmed behind thick spectacles, and his fingers, I noticed, were heavily stained with ink and chemical reagents. "Ah, you must be Mr. Simon Penhaligon, the late Professor's assistant," Holmes said, his tone turning remarkably gentle. "Pray, come in. This is my colleague Dr. Watson, whose medical expertise may prove invaluable. You must forgive our intrusion upon your grief, but the circumstances demand absolute precision. You say the temperature is 88 degrees?" "Yes, sir," Penhaligon replied, wringing his hands. "The Professor demanded strict adherence to the climatic needs of our recent acquisitions from South America. The damp heat is essential for their survival." "And the Gila monster?" Holmes asked. "I understand it is a creature of the arid deserts, not the humid jungles." "Indeed," Penhaligon nodded. "Its terrarium is in the adjoining dry room, a smaller glass house attached to the west wall. But the Professor would sometimes bring specimens into the main room for observation under the primary gas lamp. He must have brought the Gila out last night." Holmes approached the body at last, his magnifying glass drawn from his pocket. He hovered over the dead man, his nose inches from Arbuthnot's contorted face. "Watson," Holmes beckoned, "I should value your medical opinion. Examine the body, if you please. Hopkins, I trust you have no objection?" "None at all, Mr. Holmes. I welcome it." I stepped forward and began my examination. Rigor mortis was fully established, indicating that death had occurred at least 10 to 12 hours prior, likely before midnight. I examined the man's exposed skin, his hands, his neck, and finally, with extreme care, I unbuttoned his linen shirt to examine his chest, where the lizard had allegedly sat. "Well, Watson?" Holmes asked, his eyes gleaming. "It is highly irregular, Holmes," I muttered, feeling a profound sense of bewilderment. "If this man was killed by the venomous bite of a Gila monster, the signs are entirely absent. There is no localized swelling, no tissue necrosis, and most importantly, no puncture wounds. A Gila monster has powerful jaws and teeth. It does not bite delicately. It latches on and chews. There should be a horrific wound, but the skin of his chest is completely unmarred, save for a few faint, superficial scratches." "Scratches?" Holmes leaned in, his lens hovering over the deceased's sternum. Yes, here, I pointed. Merely the scraping of claws, consistent with a heavy reptile resting upon him, perhaps shifting its weight, but certainly not a bite. What of his general aspect, Doctor? Hopkins asked. His face suggests asphyxiation or a profound paralytic failure, I noted, examining the slight cyanosis around the lips and the dilated pupils. The rigidity of his posture, the grip on the armrests. It resembles the effects of a massive dose of a systemic neurotoxin, somewhat akin to strychnine or curare, but without the characteristic tetanic convulsions. His respiratory system simply ceased functioning. A neurotoxin without a bite, Holmes mused, his eyes narrowing. A locked room, a dead man, and a fearsome beast sitting upon his chest, playing the part of a monstrous red herring. A red herring, Mr. Holmes? Penhaligon gasped. But the lizard was on him. My dear Mr. Penhaligon, Holmes said, turning to the assistant with a piercing gaze. Dr. Watson has just established that the lizard did not bite the professor. Why, then, was it found upon his chest? I cannot say, the young man stammered, shrinking back slightly. I can, Holmes said cleanly. I have already mentioned that the Gila monster is cold-blooded. In a room that is 88 degrees, a living human body, which operates at nearly 99 degrees, represents a localized source of superior heat. As the professor lay dying, or shortly after his death, before his body heat dissipated, the Gila, perhaps having been taken from its cage and dropped or left to wander, sought out the warmest spot in the room. It climbed upon the professor's chest simply to bask. The beast is innocent of murder. It is merely a victim of circumstance, exploited for its terrifying reputation. Hopkins looked thunderstruck. But if the lizard didn't kill him, Mr. Holmes, what did? And how? The door was locked from the inside. Holmes did not answer immediately. He dropped to his hands and knees, moving his lens over the damp stone floor around the armchair. He examined the legs of the chair, the edge of the nearest work table, and the loose soil scattered about. Suddenly he paused. "Hello?" he murmured, his face close to the floorboards. "What have we here?" With the utmost delicacy, Holmes used a pair of tweezers from his pocket to lift an object from the shadow beneath the work table. He stood and held it up to the light. It was a pair of wire-rimmed viewing spectacles, the sort equipped with heavy magnifying lenses used by jewellers and naturalists for close, detailed work. The earpieces were curved tightly to hook securely behind the ears. "The professor's spectacles?" Hopkins asked. "They are his magnifying loupes," Penhaligon offered, stepping forward, though he kept his distance from the body. The professor's eyesight had been failing in recent years. He could not examine the finer scale patterns of our specimens without them. Holmes brought the spectacles close to his face, tilting them toward the light. Then, very carefully, he raised them to his nose and took a cautious sniff. I saw his eyes widen fractionally, a sure sign of suppressed excitement. "Watson," he said softly, handing me the tweezers, "observe the earpieces. Tell me what you see." I took the spectacles, holding them by the tweezers. Looking closely at the curved metal that would hook behind the ears and press against the temples, I noticed a faint, glistening residue. It was almost imperceptible, a slight tackiness on the metal. "There is some sort of coating here, Holmes. An ointment or a resin?" "Precisely," Holmes said. He produced a clean silk handkerchief and carefully wrapped the spectacles, placing them in his breast pocket. A resin. I strongly suspect, Watson, that if we were to introduce a solution of this residue into the bloodstream of a laboratory mouse, it would expire from respiratory paralysis in a matter of seconds. "A poison applied to the spectacles?" Hopkins cried. "But how could it kill him so swiftly? It's a solid metal surface." "Transdermal absorption, Inspector," Holmes explained, his voice ringing with authority. "There are certain toxins, extremely rare and notoriously potent, that do not require an open wound or a mucous membrane to enter the bloodstream. They can be absorbed directly through the pores of the skin, particularly in an environment of extreme heat and humidity where the victim is sweating profusely, such as this very greenhouse. The skin behind the ears is remarkably thin and supplied with numerous capillaries. The professor places his spectacles upon his head to examine a specimen. The heat of the room and the heat of his body soften the resin. The toxin enters his bloodstream. Within minutes, perhaps seconds, he is paralyzed. He grips the chair. He cannot breathe. He dies. The silence in the greenhouse was absolute, broken only by the steady drip of condensation falling from the glass ceiling onto the broad leaves of a tropical fern. "Good God!" I whispered, the fiendish ingenuity of the plot suddenly clear to me. "But Holmes, the locked door! How did the murderer administer this transdermal toxin and then lock the door from the inside?" "Ah, Watson, you are looking at the problem from the wrong end." Holmes smiled. "The murderer did not lock the door after administering the poison. The murderer administered the poison, the door was ever locked." Holmes spun around to face the assistant. "Mr. Penhaligon, the spectacles were coated with the toxin earlier in the day, perhaps left upon his desk. The professor, desiring to work undisturbed, entered the greenhouse, closed the door, turned the key, and pocketed it. He sat down. He placed the spectacles upon his face. And he died. The locked room is not a trick of mechanics, it is merely a matter of delayed action. The murderer was miles away or safely tucked in his bed when the mechanism of death engaged. Penhaligon swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. It is a brilliant deduction, Mr. Holmes, a fiendish plot, as Dr. Watson says." "But who would possess such a poison?" Hopkins demanded. "And what manner of poison is it?" "That, Inspector, is the final piece of the puzzle," Holmes said, his eyes locking onto Penhaligon. "Tell me, Mr. Penhaligon, how long have you been assisting the late professor?" 3 years, sir," the young man replied, his voice trembling slightly. "And you accompanied him on his recent expedition to the Amazon basin, did you not? The journals of the Royal Herpetological Society made much of your joint venture." "I did. We returned 6 months ago." "A successful expedition?" A strange light flared in Penhaligon's eyes, a sudden spark of passionate intensity that momentarily eclipsed his nervous demeanour. "Beyond successful, Mr. Holmes. It was revolutionary. We brought back specimens previously entirely unknown to modern science." "Including, I presume, certain amphibians?" "Yes, several species of tree frogs from the deep interior." "I should very much like to see them," Holmes said smoothly. "Would you be so kind as to guide us to the terrarium containing your most recent Amazonian acquisitions?" Penhaligon hesitated, a flicker of apprehension crossing his face, but under the stern gaze of Hopkins and Holmes he had little choice. He nodded and led us deeper into the labyrinth of the greenhouse. We passed row upon row of glass enclosures containing snakes, lizards, and toads of every description. Finally, in a remarkably humid corner, heated by a dedicated pipe, stood a large, beautifully arranged vivarium, lush with moss and bromeliads. "Here," Penhaligon pointed, the dart frogs." I peered through the condensation on the glass. Resting upon the broad green leaves were several tiny frogs, no larger than a man's thumb. Their coloration was breathtakingly vibrant, brilliant yellows, deep blues, and shocking oranges. "Beautiful," Holmes murmured, leaning close to the glass. "And deadly. The indigenous tribes of the Amazon extract the secretions from the skin of these frogs to coat the tips of their blow darts. A potent neurotoxin, Watson. Batrachotoxin, or something chemically akin to it. In sufficient concentration, it causes massive depolarization of the nervous system, paralysis, respiratory failure, and death." "But these are common dart frogs, Mr. Holmes," Penhaligon protested, though his voice had grown noticeably thinner. "Their toxin degrades in captivity. Without their native diet, they become relatively harmless within weeks. The professor handled them frequently without ill effect." "Indeed," Holmes agreed, "but I recall reading an advance bulletin regarding your expedition. There were whispers of a crown jewel, a completely new, unclassified species of amphibian. A creature so potent, so remarkably toxic, that even a glancing brush against its skin could induce paralysis. A species that the professor intended to unveil at the annual symposium next month, naming it, I believe—" Penhaligon's face drained of what little colour it possessed. He gripped the edge of the wooden table for support. "Yes," he whispered, "the golden leaf climber. We found it in a remote valley in the Choco region. It is the most toxic vertebrate ever discovered." "And where is this prized specimen?" Holmes asked, his voice sharp as a blade. In the secure laboratory, inside the main house. It requires a specific microclimate." "Let us go there at once," Holmes commanded. Leaving the oppressive heat of the greenhouse, we followed the shaken assistant back into the main house. We entered a long, well-lit laboratory fitted with soapstone counters, brass microscopes, and walls lined with jars of preserved specimens in alcohol. In the centre of the room sat a secure, locked glass case. Inside, resting upon a piece of imported tropical bark, was a single tiny frog, entirely coloured in a striking metallic gold. "A magnificent creature," Holmes breathed, "and a terrifying weapon. Tell me, Mr. Penhaligon, what is the procedure for extracting its venom?" The professor developed a method," Penhaligon stammered. "By inducing mild stress, the frog secretes the toxin from its cutaneous glands. The professor would gently scrape it from the skin and dry it into a concentrated resin for chemical analysis." "A resin?" I repeated, exchanging a meaningful glance with Holmes. "Exactly," Holmes said. He turned his back to the golden frog and faced the young assistant. The detective's demeanour had shifted entirely. The pedagogical observer had vanished, replaced by the relentless hound, closing upon its prey. "Simon Penhaligon," Holmes said, his voice cold and resonant in the quiet laboratory. "You are an ambitious man. For 3 years you have toiled in the shadow of a giant. You accompanied him to the hellish jungles of the Amazon. You suffered the fevers, the insects, the immense physical toll of the expedition. You were the one, I wager, who actually spotted the golden leaf climber in the wild. Yet it was Professor Arbuthnot who claimed the glory. It was Arbuthnot who controlled the purse strings, the publications, and the academic prestige. He intended to name the new species after himself. You were to be relegated to a mere footnote in the annals of biology. "That is the way of the scientific world, Mr. Holmes," Penhaligon cried, his hands trembling violently. "The principal investigator claims the rights. I accepted my lot. Did you?" Holmes took a step closer. "Or did the resentment fester in your heart, growing like a rot in this damp, isolated house? The symposium is but weeks away. Once the discovery was officially published under Arbuthnot's name, the chance for you to claim it as your own would be gone forever. But if the great professor were to meet a sudden, tragic end, the publication—" "No, this is monstrous," Penhaligon protested, backing away until his spine met the soapstone counter. "If he were to die," Holmes continued inexorably, "his loyal, brilliant assistant would naturally step forward to present the findings. The academic world would shower you with sympathy and praise. The Golden Frog would be named. You would secure your tenure, your fame, your future." "You have no proof of these slanderous allegations," Penhaligon shrieked, his voice cracking. "It is pure conjecture. You said yourself the room was locked. I was in the library all evening. Mrs. Gable can vouch for me." "I do not doubt that you were in the library reading your books and waiting for the poison to do its work," Holmes replied calmly. "You did not need to be present. You merely needed access to the laboratory, which you possess, to extract the resin. You needed access to the professor's spectacles, which he invariably left upon his desk in the study before his evening rounds. You painted the earpieces with the Golden Frog's lethal secretion. The professor donned them, locked himself in, and the trap was sprung. As for the Gila monster, you knew the professor had brought it out for observation. You knew it would seek his body heat once he expired. It was a brilliant, macabre stroke of luck for you, a ready-made, monstrous suspect to baffle the local constabulary and explain away a sudden, inexplicable death without a mark upon the body. "Lies! All of it!" Penhaligon shouted, tears of rage and terror streaming down his face. "You cannot prove a single word." "Can I not?" Holmes asked softly. He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew the silk handkerchief. Slowly, deliberately, he unfolded it, revealing the wire-rimmed spectacles resting upon the white fabric. "The beauty of chemical analysis, Mr. Penhaligon, is that it is exact. The residue upon these earpieces will perfectly match the unique batrachotoxin of the golden leaf climber. But we need not even wait for the laboratories of Scotland Yard to confirm my theory." Holmes picked up the spectacles by the nose bridge. He extended his hand, offering them to the young assistant. "Put them on, Mr. Penhaligon." The assistant stared at the glasses as if they were a coiled adder. He pressed himself backward against the counter, his eyes wide with an unspeakable horror. "Put them on," Holmes repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "If I am wrong, if these are merely the harmless viewing loops of an old man, you have nothing to fear. The metal is cool now, the resin is solid. But if you were to place them behind your ears, the heat of your skin would activate the toxin. The pores would open, the poison would enter your blood. You would feel the numbness creeping down your neck within minutes. You would know the exact agony your master suffered." "No!" Penhaligon gasped, shaking his head frantically. "Take them!" Holmes commanded, thrusting the spectacles closer. "Get them away from me!" Penhaligon screamed, throwing his arms over his face and collapsing to his knees upon the laboratory floor. Keep them away. Yes, I did it. I killed him. It was my frog, my discovery. He was going to steal it from me. He stole everything." The young man dissolved into a wretched puddle of sobs, burying his face in his hands. Inspector Hopkins stepped forward, his face a mask of stern disbelief, and laid a heavy hand upon the assistant's shoulder. "Simon Penhaligon, I arrest you for the murder of Professor Julian Arbuthnot. I must caution you that anything you say may be used in evidence against you." Holmes carefully folded the handkerchief over the spectacles and returned them to his pocket. He turned to me, his eyes devoid of triumph, reflecting only the cold satisfaction of a mathematical proof successfully concluded. "The problem is solved, Watson. The Sussex Constabulary, or rather the Surrey Constabulary, has its man, and the poor maligned Gila monster may be safely returned to its heated enclosure, free from the false accusation of murder." The return journey to London was a vastly different affair than our descent into the countryside. The rain had cleared, leaving the evening sky washed in bruised purples and dull golds. Holmes sat smoking his pipe, the fragrant clouds of shag tobacco filling the compartment. "It was a clever murder, Watson," Holmes mused, staring out at the darkening fields. "Diabolically clever. Penhaligon possessed both the esoteric knowledge and the access required to execute a nearly perfect crime. Had Hopkins not noted the peculiar lack of a bite, and had you not confirmed the physiological impossibility of the lizard being the murder weapon, a lesser investigator might have concluded it was an accidental death by envenomation. The locked room would have cemented the verdict of misadventure. It was your observation of the spectacles that turned the tide, Holmes, I noted. A simple matter of applying logic to the physical environment, Holmes replied with a modest wave of his pipe. A man with failing eyesight requires his spectacles for close work. He enters his workspace to observe a specimen. He dies suddenly. The spectacles are found on the floor, indicating they fell from his face during his death throes. Given that the door was locked and no assailant could have injected him, the poison had to be introduced by an object he willingly placed upon his person. The transdermal properties of certain Amazonian toxins are well documented in the literature, Watson. You really should expand your reading beyond the... I shall make a point of studying the... I chuckled. But tell me, Holmes, you bluffed him at the end, did you not? You told him the toxin would activate immediately if he put the spectacles on. Yet earlier you said it required the extreme heat and humidity of the greenhouse. Holmes offered a rare, genuine smile. You are learning, Watson. Yes, in the cool, dry air of the laboratory, it is highly doubtful the hardened resin would have permeated his skin with sufficient rapidity to cause serious harm, certainly not instantly. But a guilty conscience is a powerful amplifier of fear. Penhaligon knew the sheer lethal potency of the substance he possessed. The psychological terror of placing the murder weapon upon his own head was a pressure his nerves simply could not withstand. It is a tragedy, nonetheless, I sighed. A brilliant scientific mind lost and a promising young career destroyed, all for the sake of an academic naming convention. Ambition, Watson, Holmes said softly, knocking his pipe against the window ledge. It is a more insidious poison than any extracted from a tropical frog. It corrupts the mind long before it drives the hand to murder. Let us hope that when the golden leaf climber is finally presented to the world, the scientific society has the good taste to name it after neither the murdered man nor his murderer, but simply leaves it as a beautiful, deadly wonder of nature. We arrived at Baker Street as night fell over London. Mrs. Hudson had a fire roaring in the grate and a hot supper waiting. As Holmes settled into his armchair, reaching for his violin to play a melancholy air, I took up my pen and my notebook. I turned to a fresh page, inscribed the date, and wrote the title of the bizarre affair that had consumed our day, knowing that while the venomous lizard had been entirely innocent of the crime, it would forever remain the chilling emblem of a most singular mystery. Thank you for watching. Before you go, don't forget to check out our Patreon.